Right now, at this exact moment, trillions of dollars are in transit. State secrets, military commands, financial transactions worth more than the GDP of most countries are all moving. Not through satellites, not through the cloud, through glass. Strands of glass fiber, each thinner than a human hair, are bundled into cables the width of a garden hose. They lie on the floor of the Pacific Ocean in the dark under kilometers of crushing, freezing water. These cables carry 97% of all global internet traffic. Every bank transfer moves through them. Every encrypted government communication moves through them. Every AI training data set moves through them. Every WhatsApp message between a soldier and his family moves through them. All of it travels as glass and light, and almost no one is guarding them. We have fought wars over oil pipelines and trade routes and harbor entrances, but the most critical infrastructure in human history lies almost entirely undefended on the ocean floor. This is the nervous system of modern civilization. Today, RawGeography maps the new arteries of power. We are going beneath the ocean to find the real borders of the 21st century. What we find will change how you understand the word sovereignty forever. To understand what is at stake, you first need to understand the scale. There are currently over 600 active undersea cable systems crossing the world's oceans. They total more than 1.4 million kilometers in length, enough to circle the Earth 35 times, laid end-to-end. The first undersea telegraph cable was laid across the Atlantic in 1858 and failed after 3 weeks when the operator overloaded it. We have come a long way since then. Today's fiber-optic cables use pulses of laser light at infrared wavelengths to carry data near the physical limit of light. A single modern cable can carry over 250 terabits per second, enough to download Netflix's entire library in under 4 seconds. But this infrastructure is not evenly distributed. Like medieval trade routes that funneled wealth through Constantinople and Venice, the internet has choke points. The Luzon Strait between the Philippines and Taiwan is one of the most dangerous places on Earth for digital infrastructure. Virtually every cable connecting East Asia to North America must pass through this 400-kilometer wide gap. The Red Sea is another choke point, with cables through Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Corridor carrying most data between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. In January 2024, Houthi-linked actors disrupted 4 major cables in the Red Sea, reducing bandwidth between Europe and Asia by 25%. Internet speeds in parts of East Africa dropped by half. 25% of intercontinental bandwidth vanished not from a cyber attack, but from physical damage to a cable on the ocean floor. The Strait of Malacca, the English Channel, the waters of Alexandria, and approaches to the Taiwan Strait are all pressure points. Every nation that sits astride one of these choke points holds a form of leverage that no nuclear arsenal can replicate. Consider Singapore, a city-state with few natural resources and no strategic depth. By every traditional metric, Singapore should be a minor player, yet it sits at the intersection of multiple major cable systems. It hosts critical data centers and internet exchange points that route traffic not because the path is shortest, but because Singapore controls the flow. Data geography is the new political geography. In September 2024, 3 undersea cables in the Baltic Sea were cut. The cables connecting Finland to Germany, Estonia to Finland, and Lithuania to Sweden were severed within days of each other. NATO officials were alerted immediately. Ships were tracked and suspicious vessels were identified. One of them was a Chinese bulk carrier called the Yipeng 3. The ship had been in the vicinity of 2 of the cuts. Swedish authorities requested permission to board and inspect. China refused for weeks. The cables were eventually repaired. The incident faded from the headlines, but what it demonstrated was something military analysts have been warning about for a decade, that undersea cables are now legitimate targets in what strategists call gray zone warfare. Gray zone operations sit below the threshold of open-armed conflict. They are designed to inflict damage, send signals, and test responses without triggering a formal declaration of war. Cutting a cable and blaming it on an anchor drag or an underwater landslide is the perfect gray zone weapon. It is deniable, devastating, and extraordinarily hard to prevent. The oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface. The cables on the ocean floor span millions of kilometers. There are currently fewer than 60 specialist cable repair ships in the entire world, 60 ships, 1.4 million kilometers of cable. These repair ships have become what naval strategists now call the new Coast Guard of the digital age. Without them, a severed cable can knock out connectivity for weeks or months. With them, repairs typically take 10 to 30 days, still enough time to cause catastrophic economic and security damage. The nation that controls cable repair capacity holds a form of strategic leverage rarely discussed but deeply understood in intelligence circles. In 2020, Russia's state-owned ship Yantar was tracked repeatedly near major undersea cable routes in the North Atlantic and the Baltic. The ship carries deep-water submersibles capable of operating at cable depth, and its repeated presence triggered significant concern among NATO states. China's state-backed telecom firms have been quietly expanding their cable-laying capacity for a decade. They now bid on cable projects across Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. When they win those bids, they do not just lay cable, they build landing stations and install amplifiers and repeaters on the ocean floor. And they gain physical access to the infrastructure at both ends. This is where the distinction between commercial infrastructure and intelligence infrastructure disappears entirely. In 2013, the NSA's PRISM program was revealed by Edward Snowden. Among the most alarming details was that American intelligence agencies had been accessing internet traffic by physically tapping undersea cables at landing stations where cables come ashore. If a cable lands on American soil or passes through the jurisdiction of a US-aligned partner, American law gives intelligence agencies the right to access traffic flowing through it. This is not a bug, it is a feature. The routing of a cable is not just a technical decision, it is a sovereign decision. It determines which nations' intelligence agencies have the legal right to listen to global communications traffic. Tech giants understood this early. Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft now collectively own or co-own a significant share of the world's undersea cable capacity. Google alone had invested in over 33 undersea cables as of 2024. Its private cable infrastructure connects data centers across continents in a closed network that bypasses traditional carrier infrastructure entirely. These companies are not nation-states, and they answer to shareholders, not to parliaments. They are subject to US jurisdiction and increasingly to the laws of where they operate, creating a complex web of corporate and state interests. For developing nations, the situation is even more precarious. In the Pacific, small island nations were until recently connected to the global internet by a single cable each. A single point of failure meant a breakage, earthquake, or dispute could sever their entire digital existence. China's strategy has been elegant and ruthless. Chinese state-backed firms offered Pacific nations high-speed cable connections at subsidized rates in exchange for fishing rights, port access, or resource concessions. The Solomon Islands signed a security agreement with China in 2022 and also received a major cable infrastructure investment. Australia and the United States began offering competing cable deals, racing to ensure Pacific data infrastructure was routed through friendly territory. The cable map of the Pacific now reflects great power competition between Washington and Beijing. This is the new digital colonialism, control of the physical infrastructure through which a nation's data flows. That control creates dependency, intelligence access, and leverage that traditional military power cannot achieve. In Africa, the pattern repeats with Chinese investments in cable landing stations across the continent. Nations that accept these deals gain connectivity, but also a partner with physical access to their digital infrastructure. Chinese law requires companies to cooperate with national intelligence operations upon request, creating additional risk for partners. When the European Union implemented the General Data Protection Regulation in 2018, it was widely described as a privacy law. It was also a sovereignty law. The GDPR's requirements for data residency, that European citizens' data must be stored and processed within European jurisdiction, were a direct response to revelations about NSA cable tapping. If you cannot control where your citizens' data physically travels, you cannot govern it. If it flows through cables landing on foreign soil, you have lost sovereignty over it before you even realize it has left. Data residency laws are now proliferating globally. Russia requires that data about Russian citizens be stored on servers physically located in Russia. China's cybersecurity laws mandate that critical data remain within Chinese borders. India has been debating a data localization framework for years, partly driven by concern that Indian financial and government data is transiting through infrastructure controlled by foreign entities. But here is the fundamental problem that no data residency law can solve. The internet was not designed for sovereignty. It was designed for resilience and for redundancy and for finding any available path between 2 points. It roots around damage that was the original design requirement developed during the Cold War by DARPA to build a communications network that could survive a nuclear strike. When you send data from London to Delhi, it does not travel in a straight line. It bounces through whatever combination of cables, routers, and data centers offers the fastest available path at that millisecond. It might transit through Frankfurt, through Singapore, or briefly route through New York. The path changes constantly, automatically, and invisibly. No government can fully track where its citizens' data goes in real time. The infrastructure was not built for oversight, it was built for speed. This is the fundamental tension that defines digital sovereignty in the 21st century. Nations want to govern their data, but data obeys physics, not borders. It travels at the speed of light through a global network that no single government built. No single government controls and no single government can fully monitor. The response from both democratic and authoritarian governments has been the same: try to control the physical layer. If you can mandate that cables entering your territory must land at facilities that you inspect and license, you have a choke point. If you can require that domestic internet traffic stays on domestic infrastructure before it exits internationally, you have a degree of visibility. If you can legislate that foreign cable operators must maintain government-accessible monitoring equipment at landing stations, you can create a form of infrastructure surveillance. China's Great Firewall is the most advanced example of what sovereignty over the physical layer looks like in practice. It is not primarily a software system, it is a physical architecture with border routers at every point where Chinese infrastructure connects to the global internet, capable of inspecting, filtering, and logging traffic at wire speed. Russia has been building a similar system, the so-called RuNet, a parallel domestic internet capable of being isolated from the global network in the event of what Russian authorities call a foreign aggression against digital infrastructure. Iran has a national intranet. So what comes next? 3 technologies are reshaping the geopolitics of digital infrastructure, and each carries implications for national sovereignty. The first is low Earth orbit satellite constellations. SpaceX's Starlink currently operates over 6,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, providing broadband almost anywhere on the planet. Amazon's Project Kuiper, OneWeb, and China's SatNet are deploying competing constellations. The promise of satellite internet is resilience, a backup that cannot be cut with an anchor or severed by an undersea earthquake. Ukraine's use of Starlink terminals to maintain military communications after Russian attacks in 2022 showed satellite connectivity is a strategic military asset. But satellite constellations are not sovereign solutions because they are controlled by corporations under specific national jurisdictions. Elon Musk's decision to briefly restrict Starlink connectivity near Crimea revealed the vulnerability of depending on private infrastructure for national security communications. The question of who controls the constellation is the question of who controls the sovereignty it enables. The second technology is quantum encrypted cables. China has deployed the world's longest quantum communication network, a 2,000-kilometer fiber link between Beijing and Shanghai using quantum key distribution. Any attempt to tap a quantum encrypted cable causes detectable disturbances in the quantum state of the photons. The act of listening destroys the message. Quantum encrypted undersea cables in development would be the first communications infrastructure immune to traditional intelligence gathering. Nations with access to quantum cable networks would have a form of communication sovereignty that has never existed before. The third development is the emerging doctrine of cable as warfare. NATO officially classified attacks on undersea cable infrastructure as potential acts of war in 2023. The alliance has begun developing response protocols, rapid repair capacity, and deterrence postures around undersea cable protection. The United States Navy has reactivated submarine patrol patterns specifically to monitor suspected cable interference operations. We are watching the militarization of infrastructure that was until very recently treated as civilian and commercial. There is a map you have never been shown. It does not show mountains and rivers and national borders. It shows light pulses of laser light traveling through glass threads at the bottom of the ocean, carrying the sum total of human digital civilization from continent to continent, millisecond by millisecond. This map is the real map of power in the 21st century. The nations that control its choke points, that own its cables, that build its landing stations, that can cut it or repair it or inspect it, these are the nations that hold sovereignty, not over soil, over light. The new Silk Road is invisible. It is unguarded, and it already determines whether your country is truly free. Think about that the next time you send a message, transfer money, or simply connect. Where does your data actually go? And who is watching it travel?